The Prospect, the Dead Planet series, novelette. Written by Drew Avera. Narrated by Jamie B Cline. I can't believe she's pregnant, I thought to myself as I stood in the receiving line, awaiting processing. There were 7 prospects in front of me, each one more frightened than the next. I wasn't afraid, but the realization that I was going to miss the birth of my sister's child made me feel sick to my stomach. Our parents always coddled her more than they did me, but Ambry had a way of pouring that devotion back at me in a way that kept me from resenting my parents. I can't say I blamed them. She was always the outgoing and successful one, whereas I was the troublemaker, always the first to get in a bind that I couldn't find my way out of. "Next!" the policeman at the head of the line yelled in an authoritative tone. He looked to be about my father's age. He glared at the prospect walking past him on the way to claim his uniform. "What's the matter, princess? Did you piss your pants?" "I thought I smelled rank piss." He continued to rag the prospect in a humiliating way. This was how they broke you, by talking to you like you were beneath humanity. It made sense considering the fact that they would be stripping that humanity away in order to rebuild us into something far worse. I pulled the picture of my family out of my pocket and unfolded it. My mother handed it to me as she stifled tears from her eyes just before I left home. It was the first time I remembered her showing any kind of emotion for me. It would also be my last. "What the hell is this?" A different policeman snatched the photo from my hands. "Hey," I protested, "give that back to me." "You know that personal effects are not allowed here, Prospect. It's about time you forgot about your pretty little family," he said as he tore the picture into quarters and dropped them to the ground with an overly dramatic laugh. "They won't even be a memory by the time we're done with you, boy." Rage filled my heart and I jumped out of line and tackled the policeman. I had no idea what had come over me. This was an act of stupidity in all its glory. I knew I was about to die for this stunt. Maybe I even wished for it. A life of service to the syndicate wasn't something to take lightly. In fact, it was something many people could not reconcile themselves to do. I did not want to be a statistic, but I felt myself leaning into the category of those who would die in training. "Get this piece of shit off of me," the policeman said. I seethed as 2 others grabbed me and pulled me off of the older man. He stood up and shook the wrinkles out of his uniform and glared at me. "Get this prospect to the front of the line," he said as the other men dragged me to the front of the receiving line. Given the circumstances, I was amazed at the fact I wasn't dead. "I think our boss is going to have something special planned for you, kid," one of the men who brought me to the front of the line said. "Yeah? Like what?" I asked defiantly. "You'll see." "And wished you hadn't." The policeman walked away and shook his head. "Next," another policeman at the head of the line called as he stared at me. I walked to pass him, but he stopped me. "A kid with that kind of fight in him would do best to recognize your ass belongs to the agency now. Do you understand?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I replied. With no further words, he signaled me to continue walking to retrieve my uniform. "Size?" the old man at the counter asked. "Large," I said nervously. "Take your civilian clothes off and place them in the incinerator. The changing room is over there." He pointed at a door 15 yards to my right. "Your new uniform will be brought to you momentarily." I walked over to the changing area. The incinerator was used to burn the last physical evidence of your past. It was significant only in the fact that this was the first stage of stripping away who you were. I unclothed myself and held the bundle in my hands. There was a shake to my hands that was not due to the temperature of the room. I was afraid, and I was angry. I opened the door to the incinerator with my left hand and watched the flames lap violently, hungry for my past. The oxygen in the room felt as if it were depleting the longer I watched the flames. It took me a moment to realize that I was merely holding my breath. I shook my head and shoved the bundle of clothes into the incinerator and slammed the door closed. Behind me, a small hatch opened and a fresh uniform was dumped onto the floor by a set of uncaring hands. "Hurry up. The rest of the prospects are waiting," an unidentified voice said from the other side. I hurriedly put on the uniform and looked into the mirror when I finished. I could see myself, but I didn't recognize the man looking back at me. I was dressed like a veteran policeman minus the jacket. I was wearing black boots, black pants, and a black mock turtleneck that had the word prospect scrolled down the sleeves. This was how they identified who the prospects were, with silver lettering along the stark black sleeves. The door was slammed by an angry fist that startled me from my thoughts. I said to hurry up, Prospect Gentry. The man outside yelled at me again. I clamored for the doorknob and opened it. I was greeted by the policeman I had attacked for taking the picture of my family. He glared at me from head to toe, taking stock of the prospect that stood before him. The man angled his head slightly before backhanding me across the face. "Now, let the real fun begin," he said in a dramatic, deep voice. I looked at him and wanted to lash out at him again. Something in my mind told me not to. I didn't know if fighting back was a good idea or not, but it was the last thing I remembered before he headbutted me in the face and everything went dark. Chapter 2. "Well, how very nice of you to join us, Prospect Gentry," he chided. All eyes were on me as I stepped into the ranks with my fellow prospects. The policeman now known to me as Agent Eros smiled at me, most likely enjoying the bruises on my face from where he had headbutted me the day before. "Why don't you enthrall us all with the details of why you were late?" he said as condescendingly as possible. There was a slight snicker from my left, but it quieted as Eros turned in the direction it had come from. "I apologize, sir. I am without excuse," I said, hoping beyond hope he would turn his attention away from me. "Don't let it happen again, boy. I'll make sure you regret it if you do." "Yes, sir," I responded. "Today is a magical day for you, ladies," Eros said, now focused on the group as a whole. "We will begin our physical assessment and see what you have to offer the agency. Let's hope none of you waste my time today." He stepped in front of me and looked down at my face. I struggled to look straight ahead and avoid eye contact. "Because if you do, then I might feel inclined to do something about it," he snarled. "Am I understood?" The entire rank of prospects answered immediately. "Yes, sir." Eros stood unmoving for a moment and hovered around me in an attempt to scare me. To be honest, I was terrified of the man. He was ruthless, and I thought perhaps he might enjoy the misery of prospects a bit too much. "The test will begin when everyone reaches the gymnasium. It's a 7-mile run. The first person to stop running will be fired upon," he said as he placed a silver gauntlet over his right arm and clasped it shut. His face showed a mere moment of discomfort before returning to normal. I had read that the gauntlet had sensors that pierced the skin and made contact with the nerves of the host's body. This was how the policemen could fire the gauntlets using their minds. "And in case you're wondering, my gauntlet is never set to stun. So if you stop running, you will be executed. Any questions?" he asked. "No, sir," we shouted in response. "Let's move," he ordered, and the rank of prospects began running the 7-mile track to the gymnasium. "Move it. Get your asses in gear," he belted the command within 500 yards of where we started our run. I could feel the anxiety of what was in store for us. The first 2 miles was rather uneventful, but the 3rd mile proved to be devastating for the prospect in front of me. He appeared to fall victim to a muscle cramp in his side and began to slow. Agent Eros was quick to get involved. "Prospect Malroy, what is your major malfunction?" he asked with his voice raised in an angry pitch. Malroy sucked air and struggled to maintain his pace. "I asked you a question, Malroy," Agent Eros jeered while riding in a vehicle beside the young prospect. "You better not stop or else I'll have to kill you. Do you understand me, Malroy?" "Yes, sir," Malroy cried through grimaced teeth. The other prospect slowed down in an effort to allow him to keep the pace. "Don't slow down, don't show mercy, and keep running," Agent Eros screamed. The leader of the pack, a boy named Vline, ignored the command from Eros. "I said speed up, damn it. That's an order." Vline kept the slower pace, his feet moving to the steady rhythm of a silent drum. The quiet music of that drum ended when a laser blasted through Vline's back, sending him into the asphalt face first where he came skidding to a stop. The entire rank stopped running out of fear. "Did I say stop?" Agent Eros screamed. "No, sir," we replied in unison. "Get moving. The next one to stop will meet Prospect Vline's end. We began running again. It must have been pure adrenaline for all of us because Malroy didn't seem to respond to the cramp in his side for the rest of the run. We came to a stop outside of the gymnasium and stood at attention, waiting for instructions to come from Agent Eros. "Gentry," he called. "Yes, sir," I answered. "Report." I was left to assume that I was now the prospect in charge of our group. I paused a moment too long. I said, "Report, Prospect Gentry." "All prospects present and or accounted for," I said fearfully. "I count 11 prospects. There should be 12, said another policeman who stepped up beside Eros. "Prospect Vline fell behind, sir. He has been relieved of duty." My statement seemed to paint a smile across both policemen's faces. The newly reported policeman patted Agent Eros on the back for a job well done in lowering the number of prospects. There was no secret. They made plans to minimize how many of us graduated training. Those who could not hack it here were killed, the severity of their crimes ranging from minor infractions all the way to desertion. It was no wonder why people fled. This was a hell that no one should have to endure. "Prospects, this is Agent Alexera. He is in charge of this facility. Here you will be put to the test, both physically and mentally. This will be a marathon which will not end until the sun rises tomorrow. Agent Alexera, they're all yours." Agent Alexera smiled at Eros before responding. "Thank you, Agent Eros. All right, gentlemen. Once you enter my gymnasium, you will see a large pedestal. Whichever one of you can cling to the top of that pedestal for the longest period of time will receive 24 hours of rest. Whichever one of you is at the top for the shortest period of time will be executed. Any questions?" he asked. Silence engulfed our group. This was a test. It was a deadly game of King of the Mountain where we had to fight to stay alive. Our silence was taken as no one having a question, and Agent Alexera's lips curled beneath his sharp nose. "Very well," he said as his sinister grin grew larger. "Ready, set." The anticipation was killing me. "Go." Chapter 3. After hours of exertion, I felt as if my heart were about to explode. I struggled to catch my breath as another set of arms wrapped around me from behind and tore me from my position on the pedestal. I could see another body coming at me from below, and I quickly slammed my boot into their face in an attempt to preserve my place at the top. It was hopeless. Within seconds, I lay in a heap at the bottom of the pile of young prospects, sucking in oxygen and trying desperately not to throw up. My mind began to think that death would be a gentle release from the rigors of this pseudo-war. "Stay down," one of the guys whispered in my ear. His breath smelt of vomit, and I imagined he'd probably swallowed it in an attempt to keep Policeman Alexera from seeing weakness in him. I wanted to stay down. I wanted to stop. But I thought about my sister Ambry. I thought about the strength that she showed as I was hauled off from the recruiting station. I thought about the niece or nephew that I might never get the chance to see, even if I made it through this hell alive. I had to keep going, no matter what. I fought back against the people holding me down. I flailed about recklessly, but somehow connected against my opponents and sent them stumbling back. My life was on the line, and something in me finally broke free and let me realize that I valued my own life above those of my fellow prospects. I didn't know if I would pass the test, but I knew that lying down to die was out of the question. Against every obstacle, every act of aggression, I fought my way back to the top of the pedestal as a whistle blew. I barely heard it over the sound of my own beating heart. It sounded like a bass drum inside my head. I doubled over and fought for breath as Agent Alexera approached the pedestal. "Bravo, gentlemen. That was such an heroic display, unlike any of the others I've seen." He clapped as he carried himself over with a smirk. I knew it was all for show. He didn't care about the stats, or the people fighting to survive this madness. He just enjoyed the gawking supervisory role that he held. He looked up at me from below and gestured for me to climb down. "Now for the moment you've been waiting for. The winner is," he paused for effect, "Prospect Ayers." He applauded enthusiastically as Ayers went to stand next to him. I felt green with envy at the fact that the quiet kid in our group would be able to enjoy a reprieve from this suffering. Now for the unprivileged player in my little world. He stood stoically as he looked at the name on his tablet. He was stalling. The fear in each of us was feeding his maniacal ego. After another long pause, he said a name. Prospect Freeze, he said with a hissing sound at the end. I looked over to see the pale face of a guy I hadn't spoken to since coming here. I didn't know if I should be thankful for not knowing a dead man or not, but any regrets I might have had went silent as Agent Alexra's gauntlet fired into Prospect Freeze's chest, killing him instantly. Agent Alexra looked back at the remaining prospects with a raised eyebrow. As for the rest of you, get running. That was when survivor's regret crept into my mind, along with the stabbing pain shooting up my side as I tried to run away. Chapter 4. A month had passed, but it felt like an eternity. I was alone with my thoughts in a dark room where the only evidence that anything surrounded me were blinking lights on some kind of monitor. I squinted trying to read the words, but I still could not make it out. Instead, the dull, pale glow taunted me. There was a beeping sound no louder than the soft chirp of a bird as it nestled in the warm glory of a summer night, but this glory was not where I sat. I was in the inner sanctum of hell, deep in the gut of the agency's lair. This was where my humanity would die. I closed my eyes as current coursed through my spine. The electrodes fed pain directly into my central nervous system like a mother fed her newborn baby. I was powerless, defenseless. Each spark in my body dulled my resolve. Each glimpse into my past betrayed the love I had for it. The machine controlled everything, and it knew when my emotions strayed. They called it programming. It felt as if I shared my mind with someone else, as if I were schizophrenic. At least a mental handicap would justify this turmoil. Instead, there was someone else to blame. This realization was registered as a threat to the programming, and another jolt rocked through my body. I almost wanted to vomit, but muscular contraction stifled the urge, and I instead lay with the foul taste of bile in the back of my throat. My body was ravaged by the pain, and I pinched my eyes closed as a door opened, allowing the cascading light to pass through my eyelids. I wanted to cry out, but who would care to console me? My thoughts once again drifted to my sister a moment before I could stop it from happening. The thought was met with more torture. I wished I could resent her for the pain I endured for her memory. The hatred seemed to soothe the pain as if it were the antidote for my misery. Banish love and adopt hate. It became my mantra through the days or weeks of programming where my soul depleted and my life ended as I once knew it. I was not even a shell of my former self. I could feel the change, a shameless indifference to humanity. 99% of my mind belonged to the agency now, and 1% belonged to an elusive thought that triggered pain and detriment. I did not want to think of that 1% ever again. Chapter 5. Tell me, Prospect Gentry, do you still love her? His voice was booming, and I winced at every word he said. I feared the pain that would be triggered by mentioning her. My memories grew more fragile every day, and I loathed them. Why couldn't I forget? No. The words spilled from my lips like a secret needing to be released. The pain I had grown accustomed to did not greet me with its gruesome presence. Instead, I breathed heavily and waited for further instructions. Do you still love your parents? Agent Eros asked. The thought of them did not bring the same trauma as it used to for Ambry. I replied without hesitation, no. I felt a hand rest upon my forehead as if it was searching for a fever, but I knew what it really sought. A trigger. The fingers spread out and investigated all they could touch, looking for evidence that I was holding something back, that my dismissive gaze covered the painful effects of the programming, that retaliation was in my heart for all I had endured. It found nothing, but still I remembered them. Dr. Thesian, could you do a mental scan for me? Yes, sir, I have it pulled up on the screen to your left. The voice was nasally and distant. I felt the rustling movement in front of me as Agent Eros looked at the results. I don't see any indication of his brain activity that is cause for concern. Do you, Dr. Thesian? A light clapping of footsteps emerged closer to us before he answered. No, sir, I do not. Then perhaps we should continue to monitor him for another day or so before we resume training, Eros said as he turned away. There is a very important assignment that requires his participation. It will be the last step in ensuring his mind completely belongs to the agency. Of course, sir, the doctor replied. Please inform me if anything arises. I will return in the morning. With those words, Agent Eros left me to endure another cycle of the programming, but I did not fear it. I no longer feared any of it. Chapter 6. The needles and other electrodes departed my body with the sound of mechanical whirling. They had been there so long I thought they would remain a part of me forever. What should have been relief was regret. Despite the triggered arsenal of pain they represented, I couldn't help but feel a longing for them, for the stability in life they promised. It's time you step from the shadows and perform your final test, Agent Eros said. I don't know if now's a good time, sir. He is weak, just coming out of programming. I recommend at least a week of recovery before assigning him to anything. The doctor spoke behind Eros's back, trying to persuade him against his plan. I watched Agent Eros grab the doctor by the throat with his left hand, and through barely open eyes I watched the blue laser of Eros's gauntlet illuminate the pale face of a fearful man. I don't need permission from you. The agency assigns as it sees fit, and as an authority on that matter, I suggest that you shut your damn mouth about it. Do you understand? The doctor shook his head yes as he gasped for air. All I wanted now was peaceful sleep, but I knew I was in for a rude awakening. Agent Eros had mentioned an assignment, and I knew it would be a test. What's my assignment, sir? The words sounded weak, as if they were spoken by a frail old man. Eros grabbed my arm to help support me as he pulled me from the contraption where the programming had occurred. Your briefing will take place in the morning. For now, I need you to eat solid food and rest. If you can't walk on your own power, then you will be of no use to us. I couldn't tell if his words were those of compassion or if they were a threat of sorts. I struggled with defining the man in terms of friend or foe. I could not disassociate him from certain negative thoughts, and each time I did, I was afraid of what ailment I would suffer due to the programming. I took a few weak steps as he supported my weight. My bare feet touched the cold floor of the room, and Dr. Thesian pulled away from me as if I had something contagious. Eat slow, young man. It's been a while since your stomach has encountered food, and you may feel the urge to vomit, he said before turning his attention to Agent Eros. Here are a few bottles of serum. This will help dull his nerves and make him more alert. Eros grabbed the bottles from the doctor and led me away without saying a word. We left the dark room behind and entered a bright corridor lined with doors on all sides. Even in my stupor, I knew other prospects were behind those doors experiencing the same torment as I had for however long. Was it weeks, months, years? I had no idea of knowing, but I already felt my desire to care drift away without a second thought. The future was ahead of me, in all of its wicked glory. Chapter 7. I take it you understand the time-critical nature of this mission, Agent Eros asked for the second time. Yes, sir, I do, I answered again, this time making direct eye contact with him. I thought for a moment I detected a sense of compassion in his dark eyes. For the first time since meeting him, I noticed the light scar that ran along the hairline on his forehead. I could tell that he tried to cover it up, but it was not easily hidden. Failure is not an option. You have more at stake than merely passing your final test and becoming a policeman in the agency. Lives are at stake, including your family. The agency does not take kindly to loose ends. He stepped away from me and looked out over the city of Archaea. The sun was about to set in the reddish sky, with hues of orange and purple scattering about the landscape. In the distance, I could see the reflective material that made up the artificial atmosphere, the electromagnetic field generated by carbon fiber netting and plates. I had never noticed them in this kind of detail before. I understand perfectly. I know you do. His shoulders hunched a bit as I watched him from behind, glaring out through the window. Through the reflection, I could see that his eyes were closed. Are you all right, sir? I asked, stirring him from his thoughts. He turned to face me once more. Of course. I think the serum is wearing off is all. How about you? Do you feel rested enough to carry out this mission? I do. He nodded. Very well. I will leave you to prepare yourself for the task. A guard will be sent to collect you shortly." Agent Eros walked towards the door of my new living quarters and placed a heavy hand on the handle. The plain white room was a stark contrast to the black uniform of the policeman. The only shining surface on his body was his gauntlet, clutched to his right forearm, a formidable weapon at his side. "Yes, sir, I will be ready." He opened the door and left me to my thoughts. Alone, I felt more alive, more at ease. I reflected on my mission and wondered if I could carry out what needed to be done. My training only desensitized me to death, but not to the act of killing. For this, I was anxious. I hoped I could do what needed to be done, if not for myself, then at least for my family. With that thought, my fears subsided. The programming removed the thoughts that distracted me from my mission and set me at ease. Perhaps without the doom and gloom of a conscience, I could carry out anything the agency warranted. Chapter 8. The guard dropped me in the center of downtown Archaea. I looked around my hometown and took in the rust-colored environment with new eyes. Even the salty smell of the sea seemed different. I didn't know if it was due to the programming or just a long tenure away from home. I pushed those thoughts aside as I stepped out into the bustling streets filled with men and women going to and fro. Most avoided eye contact with me. Some even stepped around me with a wide berth. A vague memory of fear was but a fleeting glimpse at why. Every citizen feared the policeman. We were the architects of vengeance. We were the bastards of society, unloved and removed from everything human. I carried myself through the streets like a machine. I was moving on autopilot. Every sensor in my mind responded to my surroundings until I found myself standing in front of a skyscraper. I read the names etched into the glass doors to confirm that I was in the right place. Gilbrick and White, read the frosted glass in a bold font. The men who owned the business were corporate heads in the technology field. There was some speculation that Gilbrick's family had been one of the earliest colonists on Mars, but that was pure speculation. Either way, the family was among the wealthiest, and the White family shared in similar interest, catapulting them to the upper 1%. I opened the door and made my way for the elevator. The posh lobby glowed in natural light provided by a series of skylights and meticulously placed mirrors. It felt almost as if I stepped onto the sun once I reached the center. I pressed the elevator button and was instantly met with the opening of doors. I stepped into the spacious cell and waited for it to lift me to the condominium suite as detailed in my assignment. I looked blankly at my reflection in the doors and was startled by the fact that I did not recognize myself. I looked like I was half the size as I was at recruitment, and my eyes looked hollow. Mesmerized, I stared for a long while until my gaze was interrupted by the opening doors and chime of a bell. I shook my head and stepped into a foyer covered in marble and brass. It was elegant yet sterile, and I felt a tinge of repulsion by it, though I had no idea where the feeling came from. I stepped absently to the door and rang the doorbell. I noticed an all too familiar movement as I rocked back and forth on my heels and instantly regretted the association. I had been here before, but I couldn't remember why. There was an elation in my heart, reprimanded by my mind. A shooting pain dug into my brain behind my eyes, reminding me why I had to break free from the past. My heartbeat began to pulse harder, deeper, threatening to erupt as my memories retaliated against the programming. I was distraught. I was afraid. I was in pain. And then the door opened. Chapter 9. "Gentry?" she asked with a puzzled look on her face. Her belly was bigger now as she carried her child, and I could see the elation in her eyes when she looked at me. Every breath escaping my lungs threatened her existence, and I stepped back from her instinctively. "Is everything all right? You're starting to worry me," she said as she placed her hand on my arm. I jumped back more and looked up at her. The programming caused my mind to jumble and my vision became blurry. I couldn't focus on her without inflicting massive amounts of pain on myself, but I knew she was real, and the mission to terminate loomed hazardously above us. "Stay away," I cried out between pinches in my head. It felt as if there was a mechanism floating around in my head causing hell to rage inside of me. "I don't understand," she started to say as she stepped back inside, holding the door with two delicate hands. Her baby bump stared at me, judged me for what I was sent to do. I felt remorse, but most of all, I felt pain. "The agency sent me," I whispered through gritted teeth. "It's about the pontiff position offered to your husband Clendon. The syndicate will not be ignored, and I was sent to deliver a message." I struggled to force the words out, knowing exactly what that message was. A look of terror crossed Ambry's face, and I felt a different kind of pain. He told me that it was handled. The price had already been paid. I looked up at her pitifully and could see tears streaming down her face. It's never enough. I could see the gears turning in her mind as she assessed the situation. My own thoughts fluttered with ideas, which were instantly treated as a threat to the syndicate, and pain fired into my neural receptors. I grimaced as I tried to look her in the eye, hoping to ward her off and provoke her to flee. I wanted nothing more than to save my sister, to not condemn her to a fate dictated by the syndicate. Ambry fell to her knees and approached my hunched form in the foyer. I could feel her hands placed along my back as I tried to shake the emotions from my mind. I was weak when she needed me to be strong. I was ashamed. "Look at me, Gentry," she said softly. My eyes met hers, and I could see her swallow back the knot in her throat. "I need you to do something for me." I cringed as the programming modeled the mess in my mind and confused me even more. I had a mission. It came first, I thought to myself before my emotionally charged thoughts consumed them. "I don't know if I can," I said. "You must." "Don't tell me what I must do!" I screamed, both from fear and the mangled torrent of pain coursing through my body. "I'm afraid, my sweet brother. Clendon must do as the syndicate declares, or else our family will lose everything." "Don't you get it?" I seethed. "That's why I'm here. They want him to lose you." I felt a gentle stroke of her hand along my shoulders, and then a tender hug. Her body felt warm. It was the first time I had experienced human contact in months, and I relished in what felt like love. Pain interrupted it. "Do what you came here to do, Gentry." I shuddered. "I don't want to lose you," I whimpered. "It's too late for that, brother. The syndicate has seen to that. Please, don't let the same fate befall my husband." I scoffed. "How can you think like that? Do you not understand what my being here means?" I wanted to cry at her in unselfishness. She took my right hand and held it in her own. "I do understand, which is why you must do what you came here for." The blue laser illuminated on my gauntlet, and the diffuser directed the beam onto her chest. I could feel a deep throbbing pain in my chest as she spoke one last time. "I love you, Gentry." And with those words, she breathed her last. Chapter 10. I watched the inauguration of Pontiff Clendon White from the back of the Great Hall. The palace was much larger than the penthouse where he once resided with my sister Ambry, but I could see the sorrow in his eyes, even from 50 yards away. I wished I could regret what happened, but somewhere in the deep crevices of my mind my ability to do so was repressed. "Security check, Gentry," boomed the voice of Agent Von Dern in my earpiece. I responded, "Everything is good to go, sir." The channel went, and once again I was left in the static noise of the inaugural party. No more voices in my head or stray thoughts in my mind. I just existed now. It was a torrential peace, something indescribable, almost like being alone for too long. I looked about the room and realized in my daze I had lost track of my former brother-in-law. I moved my head from left to right and tried to find him amongst the crowd. That was when I felt the hand on my shoulder, so I turned. "I'm surprised to see you here." Pontiff White's voice was softer than I imagined it would be. I know he must hate me for what I had done, but there was something else behind his mannerisms keeping him from unleashing that hatred, regardless of how much I deserved it. "I'm part of the security detail, sir. I'm here for your protection," I said autonomously. "Protection from what, exactly, Agent Gentry?" he asked. "The only thing I had to live for was taken from me." I felt the smallest amount of guilt in my mind before it was swept away. "You are the Pontiff now, sir. You live for the well-being of the people. You are a representative of our government, of the syndicate." "I stand corrected, then," Pontiff White said. I could see his eyes moving from side to side as if he were looking for prying ears. "Would you step outside with me?" "Do you think that's wise? You are well protected here. Inside." He looked at me with a questioning look. "I need fresh air," he replied. Together we stepped out onto a balcony overlooking the town square. Archaea was much larger than a town, but the name of the area stuck nonetheless. The metropolis ascended towards the sky like arms eternally reaching for a god. The salty smell of the sea consumed the air around us, and it was all too familiar, yet distant at the same time. "Tell me why I shouldn't hate you," Pontiff White said, his hands gripping the railing for support. "Please, before my heart explodes in rage." I looked at him. The pity on his face grew more intense. "I don't know what you want me to say. It was an assignment. I had no choice. If you choose to hate me, then that is your right." "When did you grow so damned cold-hearted?" he asked with tears forming in his eyes. I looked at him and yearned for some kind of tangible emotion to show him I was not a monster. My actions were contrary to the person I once was, but the programming stripped all of it away. I pulled an envelope from my jacket pocket and handed it to him. "When you are alone, open this. I must go." I turned to walk away. "I don't think I can live without her," he said, remorse pouring from his throat. "Then live for something else," I said. "Open it when you're alone." And with those words, I walked away. Epilogue. I removed the envelope from the pocket of my robe as I sat in the desk chair of my newly appointed office. Everything was illuminated in a pale blue glow from the computer systems. I moved my finger along one of the holographic screens to bring up the intensity of the lighting in the room and sat back in the chair. My new position as Pontiff was not without perks, but the cost of that position would never make it worthwhile. I ran a blade through the glued flap that sealed the correspondence and emptied out the contents onto my desk. There were 2 items folded together. I picked up the photograph first and found that it was a picture of Ambry just before we were married. It had only been 2 years, but it now felt like so much longer given recent events. I stared at the picture for a long while and willed myself to remember a happier time, one not wrought with pain and misery. I could remember her laugh, her smile, the smell of her hair when she got out of the shower. Every piece of my memory was intact, which made it hurt all the more. I placed the photograph on the desk and picked up the handwritten letter that Gentry had given to me. My former brother-in-law had been loved intensely by my wife. Her brother could do no wrong in her eyes. It was more than unfortunate that I did not revere him the same way she once had. I wondered if she would still think of him in such a way if she were still alive and it was me sleeping eternally. I pushed the thought from my mind and unfolded the letter. I began reading it aloud, but soon my voice ceased as I continued. "Dear brother, I know you may no longer view me as your brother, but given our shared loss, I hope you will find it in your heart to forgive me. I did not act of my own accord, and to be honest, I am surprised that I can piece my thoughts together enough to write this letter to you now. The assignment given to me was a test, which I unfortunately passed. I hope you realize that my failure would not have prevented the untimely death of our sweet Ambry. There was too much at stake for the syndicate to allow such a thing to not take place. I wish I could feel the guilt in my heart from what I have done, but I cannot. It is not because I am heartless, but because her memory triggers an enormous amount of pain due to the programming. I have endured more than you will ever know, but I am not sorry for that burden. I am sorry because that burden ruined the life of the one I had loved most in this world. I am not your enemy. I am your brother, regardless of whatever happens in our future. My hope is you will remember that sentiment, and that you will take your pain and use it. Please remember me for who I once was, and not what I have become. One day, I hope that you can take comfort in the fact that we share a common enemy, the one who has destroyed everything we held sacred. If there should ever be a time we can stand together against such an abomination, I will stand beside you. There is a small part of me left in this shell of a man. I hope above all that you will see that instead of the thing that claims me now. Live well, my brother, until such a time that what we've lost can be avenged. Gentry." I folded the letter and placed it in a decorative box along with the photograph. I walked over to the bookcase and placed it there as a keepsake, the last tie that I would have to my former life. I thought quietly about what he'd written to me, about our common enemy. I knew there was a time coming when I would be expendable, but before that time came, I hoped that I could be responsible for tearing down the syndicate brick by brick, even if that meant I would become as much of a murderous bastard as Gentry. This has been The Prospect, The Dead Planet series, a novelette. Written by Drew Avera. Narrated by Jamie B Cline. Copyright 2014-2015 by Drew Alexander Avera. Production copyright 2015 by Drew Alexander Avera.